Psalm 104 and its parallels in Pharaoh Akhenaten's hymn. Originally written by Professor Aaron Tauler. This audio presentation is read and voiced by Shakim Ra. It is provided to the public by Ra University. Psalm 104, a relatively long psalm of 35 verses, is comprised of 5 sections. Section A, God in Heaven, verses 1 through 4. The opening paragraph describes God in heaven, clothed in glory and majesty, and wrapped in a robe of light, spreading the heavens like a tent cloth. God sits upon the clouds, the winds, and the heavenly waters, making the wind and the fiery flames his emissaries. This segs into the creation of the terrestrial world, the theme of the next section. Section B, creation of land and water, verses 5 through 9. God establishes the foundation of the earth and covers much of it with deep water. Unlike Genesis 1, the process is combative. God's blast and thunder causes the waters, which have been standing over the mountains, to flee, and then God sets the boundaries for them, so the water will not again overwhelm the dry land. Section C, verses 10 through 19. Using the oceans as a seg, the psalm continues with how God makes fresh water spring forth, allowing the animals to drink and the birds to live beside them in the trees, verses 10 through 12. The fresh water runs down the mountains, sates the earth, allowing grass to grow for cattle to eat, and agriculture for humans who produce wine, oil, and bread, verses 13 through 15. Trees drink up the water, and birds nest within them, verses 16 through 17, while wild goats live on mountains and rock badgers in their crags, verse 18. This section ends with a reference to the sun and moon in the heavens and how these determine times on earth. These first 3 sections move from God dwelling in heaven to God's creation of the world, separating water and land, providing water to enable life on earth, culminating in humanity. These themes are all known from other places in the Bible. Similarly, the theme of God's conflict with the primordial sea is an instance of the common ancient Near Eastern trope known as the war against chaos. Found in several passages in the Bible, such as this verse from Psalms, Psalm 74:13. It was you who drove back the sea with your might, who smashed the heads of the monsters in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan, who left him as fawn for the monsters of the sea. The sun and moon determining time on earth is also a biblical trope, appearing most famously in chapter 1 of Genesis, verse 14. Section 4, night is dangerous, day is hopeful, verses 20 through 30. The Psalms 4th section takes a dynamic look at life on earth, not through landscape, but through the variable of time. Following up on the reference to the lunar and solar cycles in the previous verse, it contemplates nighttime as a time for the prowling of dangerous animals. Psalm 104 verse 20. You bring on darkness, and it is night, when all the beasts of the forest stir. You bring on darkness, and it is night, when all the beasts of the forest stir. The lions roar for prey, seeking their food from God. While this motif is unusual for the Bible, it has a particularly close parallel in one ancient Egyptian poem called the Great Hymn to the Aten, written by Pharaoh Akhenaten, 1353 to 1336 BCE, the world's first monotheist. The hymn praises the divine sun disk Aten, the one true God, according to Akhenaten's theology, and as such describes the perils of the night when the Aten is absent. Note the hymn's parallels to the verses in the psalm, down to specific reference to lions. When you set in the western land, earth is in darkness in the condition of death. The sleepers are in their chambers, heads covered. One eye does not see the other. Were they robbed of their gods under their heads, they don't notice it. Every lion comes from its den. All the serpents bite. Darkness is a grave. Earth is in silence. The Creator has set in His light land. The parallels between the psalm and the hymn are also evident in the following passages of each. The psalm next speaks about day as a time of vibrant activity. Psalm 104:22. When the sun rises, the beasts come home and couch in their dens. The human then goes out to his work, to his labor, until evening. Similarly, the next section of the Aten hymn speaks about daytime activity, including even a reference to people going to work. Verses 24 through 33 of the hymn to Aten. At dawn you have risen in the light land and are as radiant as the sun disk of daytime. You dispel the dark. You cast your rays. The two lands are in festivity daily. Humans awake. They stand on their feet. You have roused them. They wash and dress their arms in adoration of your appearance. The entire land sets out to work. All beasts browse on their herbs, trees. Herbs are sprouting. Since in the hymn's theology, the sun disk is coterminous with the deity, the setting of the sun leaves the world godless, but the rising of the sun next morning brings the earth back under divine protection. The American Egyptologist James Henry Breasted, 1865 to 1935, who wrote his dissertation in Germany and in Latin on Pharaoh Akhenaten, drew attention more than a century ago to striking parallels between the great hymn and Psalm 104. A close comparison shows that there are a large number of shared motifs in the same order, including some motifs that are not found anywhere else in the Bible. Given that the hymn is earlier than Psalms, this would then be a clear case of borrowing by one of the biblical authors. In addition to the shared description of night as a time of danger and day as a time of activity, the text shares several other themes. Following the night-day passage, the psalmist offers an exclamation of praise. Psalm 104, verse 24. How many are your deeds, O Lord? You have carried them all out with wisdom. The earth is full of your creations. We see a very similar praise in the Aten hymn. Aten hymn, verse 63 through 67. How many are your deeds, though hidden from sight? O soul, God beside whom there is none. You made the earth following your heart when you were alone, with people, herbs, and flocks. Indeed, the great hymn goes farther than the psalmist in this passage in declaring Aten to be the only God in existence. Next, the psalm describes God's relationship with the sea and its creatures. Psalm 104:25. There is the sea, vast and wide, with its creatures beyond number, living things small and great. There go the ships and Leviathan that you formed to sport with. This too parallels the Aten hymn. Aten hymn 39 through 44. Ships, fare north, fare south as well. Every road lies open when you rise. The fish in the river dart before you. Your rays are in the midst of the sea. The psalm continues by describing how God's creations are dependent on God's presence and support. Psalm 104, verse 27. All of them look to you to give them their food when it is due. Give it to them, they gather it up. Open your hand, they are well satisfied. Here too, the Aten hymn has a parallel, they're referring to people as opposed to animals. Aten hymn, verse 72 through 73. You set every man in his place. You supply his needs. Everyone has his food. His lifetime is counted. This section ends with the theme with which it opened, God's absence and presence. Psalm 104:29 and 30. Hide your face. They are terrified. Take away their breath. They perish and turn again into dust. And back your breath. They are created, and you renew the face of the earth. Since the Aten hymn envisions the sun disk as Aten, this theme appears in the hymn as well. Aten hymn 112 through 113. When you dawn, they live. When you set, they die. All these parallels lead to the conclusion that Psalm 104 bears the strong imprint of Akhenaten's hymn. Biblical scholars and traditional readers are often wary of claims of direct borrowing, usually for different reasons. In this case, though, Paul Dean makes the most important comment. There is simply no alternative explanation for the concentration of context between these two poems heaped up in verses 19 through 30. Comparisons speak for themselves. The dependence of the psalm on the great hymn explains the emphasis on the blessedness of day as opposed to the frightening nature of night. Spread over 13 columns of hieroglyphic text, the great hymn of the Aten was discovered in Armana. Ancient Akhenaten, the horizon of Aten, the new capital founded by Akhenaten, in the tomb of a man named A. Poem revolves around three large themes. A. Visibility. B. Daily creation. And C. Energy. It tackles the first perennial problem of God's transcendence and immanence by asserting that although the Aten is far off, its rays reach down and are upon earth. Since the sun disk is the one and only God at sunset, everything falls asleep, and the earth seems dead. This radical notion is not part of traditional Egyptian thought, according to which, every night, the sun travels through the duat, the underworld, avoiding the attempt of the great serpent Apep to stop him from rising. The sun succeeds in rising the next morning, with the help of Osiris, the king of the underworld, who was the god responsible for regeneration and rebirth. In short, standard ancient Egyptian religion was far from monotheistic. The sun gods, there were more than one of them, were powerful, but not all-powerful, and if Ra was busy in the duat at night, there were plenty of other gods to look after the earth at that time. Indeed, Osiris was believed to use his rejuvenating powers at night, allowing the cosmos to recharge for the following day. But for Akhenaten, the absence of Aten meant the total absence of divinity. The forces of life come only from the Aten, and in its absence the earth was silent and dead. How did it get to Israel? Immediately after his death, Akhenaten's ideas were banned and his city, artistic style, God were permanently abandoned and his name erased from history. Archaeologists rediscovered him in the late 19th century, so how could the great hymn to Aten have reached Israelite poets of centuries later? There are two possibilities. Perhaps Akhenaten's ideas actually lived longer in Egypt than we think, with underground oddness perpetuating the faith. If this was the case, then maybe the hymn lasted there long enough to hitch a ride out of Egypt with the Israelites a century or two later. The alternative is to posit that oddness, theology, and literature reached Canaan even during Akhenaten's own lifetime. Indeed, Egypt ruled Canaan during the time of Akhenaten, so this is very possible. One piece of evidence for this hypothesis is a letter from Abi Milku of Tyre to Akhenaten, El Armana letter 147, which opens with a hymn of praise to the king. my king, my lord, my God, my son, message of Abi Milku, your servant. My lord is the sun, the one who has gone forth over the lands, day after day. Like the mark of the sun, his good father who enlivens with his good breath and returns with his north wind. He, the one who has placed all of the lands at rest, with strength of might, who thundered in heaven like Baal. This poem is strikingly similar to a short hymn found within Armana itself, in the tomb of a man named Pa-Nehesi, whose inscription is now in the Louvre. It seems probable that Akhenaten's imagery, and likely even the hymn itself, circulated in Canaan from the 14th century, presumably in translation. These texts and ideas made their way into Israelite circles in the following centuries, but by that time, they were not identified as Kemetic or Egyptian.